How's everybody doing? We're a few minutes early, but we'll just get started with a few announcements, then we'll get into the main presentation. I'm always curious, how many people are joining us at Boston PHP for the first time tonight? Pretty good numbers, good. Well, welcome. We're happy that you're here. We're happy that everybody's here. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm just going to rip through a few numbers here just to give you a sense for who we are. We hope that you come back. We try and be a resource that's valuable. We've been around since 2002, believe it or not. This December will actually be the 10-year anniversary of Boston PHP, which is pretty cool. And we're trying to put together a little thing that we're going to do in combination with our December meetup, which you probably want to check out. We've got a thing on December 12th. It's a meetup with the author Larry Ullman. How many people have heard of Larry Ullman? Yeah, he's written, I said in the last thing, he's like the Stephen King of technology writing. He's written something like 24 books across a whole bunch of different topics related to web development. PHP, does a lot of PHP, but he talks about other stuff as well. So check that out. We're going to try and do kind of a 10-year anniversary at that event to celebrate that. So we've had 119 meetups so far over that span. We now have over 3,000 members. I just looked at the site before the presentation. We were up to 3,099 members. So you can see that not everybody shows up. Good thing, right? We certainly wouldn't have space to put everybody. It'd be cool if we did one day. But if you're a beginner, if you're new here, we're happy that you're here. You don't have to come here and feel like you know all the answers. We encourage people to ask questions. We encourage you to come here and learn. We try and produce content that has a lot of educational value. I mean, that's our core mission. And as part of what we do, in addition to the meetups like this, the things we do at night, we have this thing, that a self-study group that Gene runs. This is Gene, right here. And he does a self-study group that I'm just going to have him talk about for a couple minutes, because I think you'll think it's interesting.
Cool, thanks, Matt. So we started our virtual self-study groups in January of 2011. So we're coming up on our 2nd year anniversary. We started with PHP. And what we found was, even though this is a PHP group, we found that a lot of folks are here not because they're PHP experts, but because they're more PHP beginners and they want to learn a technology. So we started PHP Percolate in our first season. We've run through 3 of them. We are now coming to the end of season 4 of PHP Percolate. In January, we are going to have, for the first time ever, we're going to have a more advanced PHP course. So we're going to be focusing on object-oriented programming. So if you already feel that you're reasonably comfortable at PHP, that's what you need to look for. So sometime in December, we're going to announce that. But we also have another virtual self-study group going on right now called jQuery Jam. And that one just started. We're learning jQuery Mobile. So if anyone wants to see me afterwards, I'd be glad to get you involved or tell you more about how those programs work. For now, what we'd like to do is we'd like to move forward so we can get our presentations going and learn some really exciting things about mobile technology tonight. Thanks.
Thanks, Gene. So everything that we do, we're run by unpaid volunteers. All of our events are free, as you can see. We try and do pizza. All of these events, the speakers that we have, the topics that we come up with are pretty much all, the starting point for all of that, it starts in your ideas. We want you to tell us basically what you want to hear about, what you want to learn about. So we use meetup.com, that's how you all came here. There's a section there to submit ideas. You can also email me, Matt, at bostonphp.org. We really want your ideas, basically on anything that we do, on how we run this group. It's all volunteers. I also want to talk a little bit about what we're doing with video. So we've been videoing our talks for a while. We haven't done as well of a job as we really want to do with it. Our turnaround time has been a little bit unpredictable. If any of you have wanted to see a video of a talk we've done in the past. So one of my goals this year is to really tighten that up. And we've got a volunteer, Ernie, in the back, who I just want to point out. Say hi, Ernie. If we could all give him a round of applause. Ernie's helping us out now. So one of the things that we're going to try and do is turn these around faster for you. We realize that people can't make all of these, make it to all the events. So we want to try and turn these around. We're trying something different this evening where we're actually going to try and send out kind of a quick and dirty, rough version of the video, like maybe even tomorrow, or late tomorrow, or the next day. Totally unedited, basically just the screen and the audio out the door. And then after the editing is done, send out a more polished version. And ultimately, we'd like to get that a little bit faster and a little bit better and maybe do other interesting things. But it's not an easy job. It's time consuming. And what I'm asking is if anybody knows anybody who might want to get a little bit, who's into video, who has the skills, who might want to donate their time, maybe get some exposure in that realm, we really need help because there's a lot of back-end time. Ernie's not going to be able to be here every month. So if anybody knows anybody, or if you personally want to help out with video on any level, whether it's the production or shooting it, or if you know something about hosting it, or you could help us out in any way, we'd appreciate that. The next thing is sponsors. So these are free events. Microsoft gives us this space, which is great. They give this to us every month. We don't pay a dime for this. Pizza is primarily paid for with sponsors. We raised some money from our big conference that we had in August, and we've been paying for pizza with that money that sponsors gave us for that event. But we need to keep this ongoing. We're going to have some costs with all kinds of stuff, and we don't ever want to charge money for these meetups. So if you work for a company or an organization who's interested in sponsoring, please let us know. We also need some help from a volunteer standpoint in trying to manage that. We have a pretty small leadership team, and if you or somebody you know is interested in helping us manage sponsors, if you have that skill set, we'd love to have you get involved with us. And we do all kinds of stuff. So if you do want to get involved here on those things that I talked about, video and sponsorship, or anything else that we do, any other ideas, you can contact me at matt@bostonphp.org. Those are all my announcements. Now I want to just shift gears, and I just want to say a little bit about this talk tonight. So I'm excited about this talk. I've known Greg for a few years. He's come to some Boston PHP events. We've bumped into one another at some other developer events. So I'm a PHP developer, and I'm constantly up against a situation where I think, oh, that would be really cool to do with mobile. Not necessarily the whole application, but let's say there's a web app, but especially with camera and accelerometer and stuff like that, I have these ideas where I think, oh, that would be really neat. But you can't really do it through a browser on a laptop. It's on mobile. It's, the thing that you're thinking of is clearly it's got to be done with mobile. So, I thought there's got to be other developers out there who are primarily PHP developers or web developers in general thinking, how do I make this transition to mobile? Because it's totally different, right? You've got limited resources, you've got memory management, you've got all these other features, all these other device-specific features, compiling, all these other things that you don't necessarily have to think about day-to-day in PHP. So that was kind of the genesis of this. It's what are the skill sets, what are the thought processes that a web developer needs to be thinking about in order to sort of make this transition to mobile, and then what's the relationship between those two things? So I hope I kind of gave you a decent intro on that, but so I'm excited about it. I want to hand over the microphone to Greg and Craig from Raizlabs. Let's give them a hand.
Can you guys hear me? Is this mic okay? Yes? Yep. You're back? Awesome. Thanks. My name is Greg. I'm with Raizlabs. And started the company called Raizlabs in 2003. Prior to that, I was working at Microsoft, so this is kind of an alma mater for me. So thank you for Microsoft for sponsoring the space, and thank you for Matt for organizing. We've been building applications and application designs for a number of years, and we actually started on web applications. And so a little bit of our history. I started the company in 2003. I've been doing web design and web development for a number of years before that. And we really got into this helping companies build user experiences and user interfaces. So when we started doing the company, we were designing user interfaces, designing user experiences. Our first application actually in the mobile space was for Hallmark cards, and they had contacted us about doing some user experience and user interface design, some prototyping. We actually chose Windows Mobile at the time. This was the leading smartphone product out there, and we said, let's build a smartphone application, let's use Windows Mobile, because at the time that was one of the leading platforms and applications that you could write apps for. And so we wrote that application, and Craig, who will be speaking later, said, hey, this is kind of cool, maybe we could use some of the geolocation GPS functions on this. And so we wrote a very simple application that would grab the geolocation and transmit that to a website, so you could see your point on a map as you moved around. And this was pretty cool. We said, hey, let's turn this into an iPhone app. And this was, again, very early days of the App Store, where we wrote a little bit of PHP to take that point and show it on a map and a little database to manage all that. And that was sort of our initial foray, our sort of hello world into the mobile space. That mobile application actually led to a much larger project, which was Runkeeper. And that was, again, taking geolocations and now plotting that path along plotting your location along the path as you run. And so that led to more complex applications like Benjamin Moore Paint's, Rule of Law, Bloomingdale's, applications for MIT. To date, we've done a little over 100 applications, probably around 20 million downloads plus of the different applications. And so we've kind of been there, both on the web side and on the mobile side. Obviously, building mobile applications and building native applications, there's pros and cons to each one. And so people who are building mobile applications or native applications, it's important to understand the differences and the pros and cons of each of these. So if you're building a native application, you tend to have faster response time, you have better user experience because you're utilizing the horsepower right on the phone. You're not going through an interpretive layer. You get to use the native APIs, so we talked about things like accelerometer, geolocation, but you also get access to things like your contacts, your calendar, your camera, your photo roll, basically anything that you can do on the phone that Apple gives you an API, you get a much richer set of things that you can do. Now, this obviously comes with some cons as well. The first is your application can crash if you're not careful, so you have to be careful of what you're doing. You certainly don't want your application crashing. It's certainly harder to develop for, and so writing a hello world for an iPhone application is more complicated than writing hello world in HTML and just having it be a tag. And lastly, native application development tends not to be cross-platform, and I'll talk a little more about this a couple slides down, but usually when you're developing a native application in Objective-C, that code is not really repurposable to a Java application for Android, so you tend to have separate code bases. On the flip side, on web development, broad adoption of the platform, you guys all know this. It's built on standards as much as it can be. The code reuse is much higher, so if you're building an Android or an iPhone application or using web technologies, you are able to reuse it, but that performance is a con. So getting to that same native performance is very difficult, and there's lots of examples of companies that have tried to get to that performance mark with web applications and had trouble. The other is browser compatibility, just making sure that things work correctly and getting that test coverage either across WebKit or whatever browser experiences you're building for. So how do you get started? If you're at this talk, you're maybe interested in mobile in some capacity. It's really a simple two-step process. Week one is frustration, and so you're going to spend the first week pretty frustrated about whichever platform you choose and whatever tools you choose to use. Week two is an added week of frustration mixed in with a little smidgen of understanding. And we've done this both for iOS and Android, and Craig can certainly tell you his weeks of frustration and banging his head against the wall until the aha moment happens. And it's usually 2 to 3 weeks in, and then things start cooking. Beyond the time requirement, and this is really true of learning any new platform. If you know PHP and you're learning Rails, it takes kind of a while to figure out the MVC frameworks and the tools and the techniques and the patterns and things like that. So on iOS, you need to do your development on a Mac. Apple doesn't really provide any tools for doing native development on any other platform. You need Xcode, which is available in the Mac App Store for free, so you can download that as well. If you want to be building and testing your applications on a device, you have to get a $99 license from Apple. You don't need that if you want to just dabble, but if you actually want to see your application running on your personal phone or your friend's phone, you're going to need that license. Very similar things for Android. If you want to develop for Android, it's a little more flexibility in terms of your desktop. So you can certainly be on a Mac or on a PC. I think that you can support Linux. You're going to need Eclipse as your IDE and a number of libraries that Google/Android provide for you to do your development. Same story with the license. For Android, you actually don't need the developer license to put it on your personal device. You can just do that. But if you want to publish your application to the Google Marketplace, you're going to need to sign up for the Android developer program. So question we get a lot, what about hybrid apps? And so hybrid apps are native applications that mix in web content, and there's a lot of examples of them. Earlier in this talk, we were chatting about Facebook and how Facebook was hybrid and continues to mix and match, and there's lots of examples of them. It's really trying to take the best of the native application and the performance and the characteristics and taking some of the things that web technology is good at. And this is particularly advantageous in heavy content applications that are trying to do text formatting or images and alignment and things like that. And so we've done a number of these. You can absolutely mix and match and get the best of both worlds, but you have to be very careful because there's a temptation to use web more and more. And if you use full web or what are called a PhoneGap application or jQuery mobile application or something like that, you can run into performance issues. How many people are iPhone users, Android users in the house? Awesome. So if you are an iPhone user and you're familiar with the App Store application, you've probably seen that it's a little bit janky, a little bit slow. It doesn't really respond the way that most applications, because it's written as a hybrid application. It uses a lot of HTML technology to drive that application. Very similar app that's built native on the iPhone is the Music Store application. Again, just to get a feel of the difference in terms of performance and user experience, you really see a difference in terms of how those things are structured. The Facebook application made the news a couple times because of how it transitioned from starting off as a native application, going to a web-based application, then coming back to native. And so there's a lot of pros and cons. Performance tends to be one of the ones that it keeps coming back to. What about cross-platform tools? So there are no shortage of tools that give the notion that you can develop your code once and have that code once be deployed to both Android and iPhone. And this is particularly challenging. I mean, these are just some of the libraries: PhoneGap, Accelerator, AppMaker, TigZ, jQuery Mobile, SensuTouch, PhoneGap, MonoTouch. And this is just a short snippet of me spending 5 minutes on Google. I've actually seen probably 50 or 60 of these frameworks come along. It's very tempting for web developers. The reason that our company has chosen not to go down this path is really a couple of reasons. The first is performance and end product quality. We think that building a mobile application, you really should shoot for how can you build the best product. And it's very difficult to get the performance characteristics and user experience characteristics at the pinnacle of what is best using a web-based approach. The second is long-term maintenance and maintainability of the code. And so if you are taking upon yourself the burden of one of these frameworks, you have to ask yourself, is this going to be something that I'm going to be able to maintain several years down the road? And so when we're building applications for clients and customers, we want to know, okay, if we're building this application for you and we chose a technology like TigZ or Accelerator or AppMaker, then several years down the road, are they still going to be around? Is someone going to know how to build to that platform? Is Apple still going to accept it? Is that going to be a good way to do mobile application development? Are you going to be able to take advantage of all the native APIs that Apple makes available in the next iPhone version and the version after that? So the last one is native look and feel and controls. So a lot of these frameworks will use web technology and apply CSS styles to make it look like a native application, but there's always a little bit of jankiness in terms of how it works, and so the performance isn't quite right, the corners aren't quite right, it comes close, but it doesn't always get there. So we tend to advocate for native application development, and that's why. So with that aside, are you ready to feel the power of the force and take your journey to Apple? Let's get started. I'm going to talk through 4 steps. We're going to talk through the design process of an application. Craig's going to talk through coding an application. We're going to do a full sample of a simple hello world application. Craig will go through that. It's actually a little more complicated than that. And I'll talk through deploying, testing, and marketing of that application as well. So when you're designing a mobile application, you certainly have to understand the differences between the platforms and what the best characteristics and traits of each one are. From the simple things like fonts and typography, when you're building application for mobile, your fonts tend to be larger. 14 to 18 point fonts are typical to make sure that the legibility is nice and high so you can read those applications. On web and desktop development, you often see 10 or 12 point fonts. The actions and interactions that you use on a mobile device are also different. So tapping, swiping, pinching, and scrolling is not the same as when you're designing a web-based application. And this is another one of the reasons why hybrid applications can sometimes get into trouble. Web technologies aren't great at detecting pinches and swipes and things like that, so you often find little weirdnesses in how they interpret that. So these gestures are certainly different. When we're designing an application, we like to design for the physical, and we mean that in 4 different ways. Physical in terms of the human hand and how it works, and so when you're holding a phone in your hand, there are certain zones that are going to be easier for you to hit than other zones, so we certainly want to think about that. We think about the actual device itself and how you're holding it, whether it's vertical or horizontal, whether you're physically sitting down or holding on for dear life because you're writing the MBTA. If you're building a shopping cart app, are you holding a bag of groceries in one hand and holding the iPhone in the other? And if you're trying to hold a barcode, how are you doing that? So just getting in the mind of how people are actually doing it. The third part of physical is obviously location. And can we use the physical presence of location, geolocation, or some other location to augment and enhance the application experience? If you can enhance the application with location, it makes it easier for the user. They have less typing to do, less input to get better output from the app. Design for readability and legibility. You guys in the back read that bottom row? If I could shake the projector, you probably couldn't. It's about getting information across, not the quantity of information, but your ability to actually convey what you're trying to convey. Here's another example. This is really on legibility. The one on the left is a screen from Foursquare. The one on the right is a screen from Yelp. They're all really about selecting a venue. And so you can see that while the Foursquare app design, a designer spent some time putting colors and icons and things like that, but the legibility ends up being low, so it's hard to read that, especially if you're on a mobile device, especially the smaller text that's in light gray font. The Yelp design, maybe no design went into it because it looks like a stock table view, but the legibility is high. It makes it much easier to hit something, read it, and understand it. And so really thinking about both the design as well as the legibility and ability to use that application together. We like to design our tap targets to be particularly large. That's because of how you use the phone. You have fat fingers, and when you're holding your thumb or finger over the phone, you get a problem called occlusion, which is that your thumb is blocking your view. So especially if you're using your thumb to interact with the phone, it's why you want the fonts to be particularly large, because you can't necessarily read the whole thing. That's why you want your buttons to be particularly large if you can as well. If there are opportunities to prevent the person from typing or to hint them so that they don't have to type, that's really helpful from a design perspective. So here's a sample screen that Apple provides for setting up your email. And so they could certainly have had simple fields to enter your SMTP address and your server and your username and password. But they've really taken the opportunity to say, we're going to encourage less typing and less looking up information by offering you the top providers to make it easier for you to get that information in. So they've biased it for the 80%. Here's another example where you actually do have to enter information and input. And so again, don't make users type if they don't have to. Autocomplete, something you guys are probably very familiar with in web space. It just enhances the mobile experience that much more because on a web desktop experience, even though if you don't have autocomplete, typing isn't that hard, on a mobile device it's that much harder. So providing affordances for things like this is very important. Less is more. I'll just read Albert Einstein's quote, is everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. And so definitely take that to heart. building a great mobile application isn't about taking everything in your web-based application and bringing it over to mobile. It's really thinking about mobile as its own access point to your overall tool or service, and how can you make that great in a mobile experience, which means you don't have to bring over everything. You have to think about what do people need when they're out and about in mobile and using your tool or application. We use a technique called wireframing. This is something that we actually used to do when we were doing web-based applications. We would wireframe the application to give a good high-level sense of what the screens are and what the flow between different screens are. You don't have to be a graphic artist. You just need a piece of paper and a pencil to sketch out the screens. And it's a helpful process we've found to understand what that flow between different screens and applications are. We actually have a lot more of these wireframes and examples you can find on our website if you're interested. Yeah. Next, Craig's going to dive into how you actually build one of these applications. We use a tool called Interface Builder, and Interface Builder is kind of what you see is sort of what you get, which I'm sure everyone who's ever done any web development is very familiar with. And so we'll dive into that, build a simple app, and I'll be back.
So how many people here have started to dive into Xcode and iPhone development? All right, so some of this is going to be pretty much stuff you've already covered, but I wanted to get into getting started on iPhone development. So what happens when you want to write your first application? So I'm really going to start from the top here. So I've launched Xcode, and I'm going to do a new project. So Xcode gives you some templates to choose from. And the easiest one to get going with is just single view application. This gives you a single view that is just the core of the application, and there's not much to it. So I'm just going to choose a name and call it Getting Started. Some of our options here are what device you want to apply to. So I'm going to just leave it as iPhone, but you can choose specifically iPad, iPhone, or Universal. That's going to give you an application that you would deploy to both platforms. You have the option of using storyboards. That's another interface builder technique of creating an application flow. We're going to leave on use automatic reference counting with ARC. That's basically so I don't have to think about memory management. This is new to iPhone 5 and above. Actually, iPhone 4.3 and above. Before that, you had to do all the routines and release on every variable of your own. So we're going to leave that on and just get our application started. Here. And that's it. We have an application, and we can run it as is right now. So there's my application. It's just a screen on my iPhone. It doesn't do much. So we're going to change that. What the application template gave you is a few files. One is the application delegate. This is kind of the root of the application. This is where everything starts. You have things like application did finish launching. That's really the entry point to the application. But what we're interested in right now is the view controller that got created. This is the first view of the application. So it gave us a view controller class, a view controller implementation file, and the view controller interface file. So getting into it, you can start dropping controls onto your interface file, onto your NIM file. It's pretty easy to really get started using interface builder control. The problem arises when you want to tie these things into your actual code. So I can run this right now. And you'll see my interface has been updated. It's pretty much an exact replica of what you saw here. But I want to actually do something with this code. So you see on the right-hand side here, you have things called outlets. Outlets are what you're going to use to attach your interface elements to the code that was behind it. So the file's owner, that's actually the view controller class. And you can see that on the properties here. So I selected file's owner, and it's telling me that the owner of this interface file, that's actually the view controller. So to start actually associating these visual elements with code in the view controller class, I'm going to use something called the assistant. So the assistant splits the screen, which is kind of tough on a low resolution screen here, but I still have my interface file here, and I have the corresponding code on the right-hand side here. So if I want to associate this label with a variable, I'm going to select it, and then attach an outlet to it. So I'm literally dragging a line from the visual element to the source code header, and I get to name it. It's going to prompt me, and I'm going to call this title label. Great. So actually assigning a value into that title label now that I have one, I'm going to go into the implementation file, and every view controller has a view get load method. That's when the view is done loading from the XIB file, from the interface builder file. So because I created that outlet, I can now use self.titleLabel.text equals getting started. If I run again, you see my text has been updated. I don't have to do that in code. I could have done getting started in the interface builder file, but this enables us to do something more dynamic. So if I wire up those buttons, let's take this first button, and we're going to do the same thing, but instead of adding an outlet, I'm actually going to add an action. So you have outlets here, but you also have actions like touch up inside or touch up outside. I'm going to use touch up inside. That means when the user touches a button and then releases the figure, when they're within the contents of that button, that's going to trigger the action that I associate with this button. So again, dragging to the header file, I get to add a function. So I'm going to call this button one press. And that's it. It creates the function for me. I go back into my implementation file, and there's the function body. So I can, let's add something more dynamic that you couldn't do in Interface Builder. I'm going to keep track of how many times this button was actually pressed. So I need a variable to keep track of that. So up here, I'm going to synthesize a new property on my view controller class. Call it property, atomic sign, and the property is going to be an integer. And it's going to be count. I can get into the details of what is non-atomic and what is a sign a little bit later. It's kind of outside the scope of this, but important things to know if you get really deep in iPhone development. So I've got my count property, and every time I hit count, I'm going to increment it. So let's hit that button, I'm going to increment count. So typical C++ syntax, self count ++, and then I'm going to assign a new string to that title label. So self.titleLabel.text. I have string formatters, so in a string, string with format, I can say getting started. I can use a normal integer placeholder and self.count. So expected result is I run this code now, and every time I press that button, it's going to increment the count and update the text in that label. Pretty straightforward. Now, most iPhone applications that you have a typical navigation flow to them. You have a main screen, and then you tap a button and it pushes some content onto the stack, and then you can hit back and pop content off. That's kind of a typical iPhone application flow. So I'm going to show you how to actually wire up another view controller into this application and associate it with this button here. So we're going to go back in here. First we need to decide what's the content that we're going to push onto this application. Well, let's push some web content on, some straight web content. So I'm going to create a new file. I need another view controller to hold this content. So I'm going to create another Objective-C class. It's going to derive from UI view controller. And I'm going to call it web view controller. Just going to add it right there. And it creates another empty view for me. Great. So back in my main view controller, I need to wire up that second button to actually do something when it's clicked. So I'm going to go back to the assistant and drag in another action or touch up inside on that button. I'm going to call it button 2 press. Great. I've got my secondary button method. I need to go import that new view controller I created so I can create an instance of it. Over here, I'm going to create a web view controller initialize it. It creates a new variable for me and it's initialized. But getting this view to actually display is another problem. Because I don't yet have an application that has a navigation stack on it, I actually need to modify this application so it is stack-based. So that all happens in the application delegate. So this is the boilerplate code that Xcode generated for me when it shows the single view application. So you can see what it's doing. It's creating the window, it's creating that first view controller, and then it's assigning that view controller as the root of the window. That's all it's really doing. What I want to do is instead of using that view controller as the root, I want to add a navigation controller as the root. So I have to create one. So UI, navigation controller, nav C, my navigation controller, I'm going to allocate it and initialize that. I'm going to initialize it with the root view controller that we already created. So self.view controller. Here. So now instead of setting the view controller as the root, I'm going to set nav controller as the root. So when I run that, you can see now I have this title bar on top where I didn't have it before. That means I'm within a navigation controller, but it's blank. I want to actually use a property that's default on view controllers called the title. Not the title label, but the title itself is a string on most view controllers that when added to a nav controller will fill in that label. So this is my first view controller. Run it again. And now it's telling me what view I'm actually looking at because the title has been set. But this button still doesn't push that new view controller, the view controller I call web view controller, onto the stack. I need to wire that up. So back in the web view controller, back in the view controller, on that button's action, now that I have a navigation controller, I can do self.nav controller. I'm going to push the new view controller, or web UC, and I'm going to allow it to use the default animation. With that, if I tap here, I get my new view controller. It's still empty, but what I'm given is a back button to navigate back to my previous view controller, and it's telling me the title of the view controller I'll navigate back to. So getting content into the new web view controller is a matter of either dragging other controls onto the view or dragging in the web view that I want to display. I'm going to drag in the web view from the side here, but I still need to associate it with an outlet. So we're back in Assistant. I'm going to make sure that I'm looking at the web view controller and not one of the other view controllers, and assign an outlet to that web view. So I've made an outlet called web view. Now in the web view controller's view did load, I can now tell it to load some web content. So to do that, I need a URL. And this URL. The string. So I need to give it the string, the fully qualified URL of that content that I want to load. I have some content living here in a test PHP file, just a really long list of data. So I'm just going to give it that URL here. Now that I have the URL, I have to tell the web view to load it. So web view, tell it to load data. And load data takes a request. It doesn't take a URL. You actually have to initialize and I'm having keyboard issues. What? Okay, let's try that again. I'm going to load a request. I'm going to give it NS URL request object. Request with the URL that I just created. If I do that, when the view is completed loading, it's going to load that URL content and push it into the web view. And there it is. I've got a standard web view in a view controller that I push onto the navigation stack. The next part of it is doing this kind of example, but avoiding a web view. So how would I display this type of content and do it natively? We would typically do that in a table view. So I'm going to add another view controller. We'll call it content view controller. So here's my next view controller. I'm going to go back to this example here, this view controller, import my content view controller. I'm just going to swap out the view controller that I push over here. So instead of doing the web view controller, I'll do the content view controller. So now that we've done that, I'm back to an empty view because I haven't added anything to my content view controller. So I want to make that content view controller a table view, or at least the container for a table view. So that's really just dragging the table view in here, and again, assigning the outlets that I need. I've got my view controller and I've got an empty table. Now, populating the view controller is a little trickier. So table views aren't something you just push data into. Table views actually ask for their data when they're ready for them. So you use a delegation pattern. So this content view controller actually has to implement a protocol or an interface. So you have to tell it that it's a UI table view data source. And now that it's a UI table view data source, I have to actually implement a few required methods. I'm going to just grab those from the protocol declaration, go back in here, and give this function those methods. So the table view is essentially going to ask these two core questions of my view controller. It's going to ask me, how many rows do you have in a particular section of data? And give me a cell that I can display for a particular row. So just to get started here, I'm going to return something arbitrary, like 1,000 rows. I'm also going to create a cell that the table can use for display. So to do that, so you have to name your cells. So I'll tell you. So table cell reuse in iPhone is extremely important. Because let's say you have 1,000 rows, or 10,000 rows, or 100,000 rows. You don't want to allocate 100,000 rows. There's limited memory on these devices. So you want to reuse cells, and you do that by naming the cells. You give it an ID, and then when you're ready to give the cell to the table cell, the first thing you do is actually ask that table. Alright, protocol declaration needs to go in the header file. So back here, to do table cell reuse, we actually ask the table for a cell that is done with. So let's say I had 1,000 cells, and I can only show up to 20 of those at a time because you just overflow the screen. There's no need to create more than 20 of these things. So the system's going to ask you for 20, and then it's going to allow you to start popping these things off and using them. So if this method actually has cells that it's no longer using, it's going to return a valid value. If it doesn't have any cells that it's not using anymore, cell is going to be nil. If cell is nil, I actually then have to go ahead and create one. And there are some built-in styles that you can use. I'm just going to use the default style. And this is the key, though, for cell use, is telling it that the same cell ID that I tried queuing one with before. So the system knows I'm asking for a specific type of cell. So that's it. Now I just need to set some data on my cell. So the default style has a text label. And I'm going to give it some data here. String format. And say test cell and index. Row. If I know what row I'm at, and then I can return the cell. Now when I press, I get an empty table. The thing we missed, though, is telling the interface builder file that the source for this data is actually the view controller that owns it. So I have to attach the data source outlet, which is only going to be on certain types of controllers, like table views, collection views, things that use this pattern of delegation. I have to tell it that the data source is actually the view controller by dragging that over. When I do that, I get a populated virtualized list of thousands of rows. And this is using table cell views. So I can keep going and say, this is great, this is fake data, but how do I actually load data from a website or from a web service? So I had this test before, which is just HTML. Let's say I had a JSON file that had the same data. I have this array of JSON data. I can use some tools also on the view to load to actually load that remote content. So that's an array of data that I want to load. So I'm going to create a property for it to hold on to that data. And that's on a strong property. That's array. Array. Great. So on the view to load, I actually want to load data from this API. So I'm going to create a URL for it. And then I have to actually go ahead and request that data from the website. And do that with a combination of an NSURL request and an NSURL connection. So I create an NSURL connection. I create a connection with a request, NSURL request. I create the request with the URL that I created. And then I'm going to set the delegate as self, so that when the connection receives data from the web service, it knows where to send that data. Now the NSURL connection has to conform to, the delegate of the NSURL connection has to conform to another protocol, NSURL connection data delegate. So to actually receive data from the web service, look at this protocol here. We're interested in a couple of these methods. Did receive data, and connection did finish loading. I'm just going to grab those back here and grab the ones I want. Now that I have these two methods, I can say, okay, when the connection receives data, and it's going to receive data in chunks, I'm going to wind up in this method. I need to accumulate all the data that it's sending into my view controller. So I need a variable to hold on to this stuff so I can eventually parse it and display it. So I'm going to create another variable for that. Another strong property. called NS mutable data object. That data object that data nil, I'm going to create a new one that can belong to this data. Data. That just creates an empty data object, and then I'm going to just save the data that came in that chunk to that new data object. That data, and then data. Great. When the connection is done with all the data, it's going to send this final message that the connection is finished building. At that point, I can take the data object that I just accumulated and parse the JSON out of it. So I'm looking to populate that array that we have, self.array, and I'm going to use the built-in JSON deserialization tools, so NS JSON serialization, JSON object with data. So I have an NS data object. I'm just going to do self.data. I don't have any options, and we'll ignore the error for now. So given that, I've just populated an array of data. And then I just need to tell the table view to reload from its data source. But we solved the problem of this table view having fake data, this arbitrary list of 100,000 rows. Instead of that, I'm going to tell it to use the array that we populated. So if I have an array, I can call count. If this is nil, in Objective-C, nil is actually a valid object. You can pass it any method you want and it won't crash. So I can say count on a nil object and it's going to return 0. So that's the count. And then as far as the data in the row, I have to, instead of returning this arbitrary string here, I'm going to return self array objective x next path row. That's going to take the row that the cell is asking for, go into that array, and grab the string from it. So do that. There's my remote data coming from the web service. So that's kind of the overview I had of how to fire up different view controllers to a main view, change the main view to have a view controller or navigation controller at its root, and then load in remote data either via a web view or from the JSON feed. That's it. I'm going to hand it over to Greg.
Go over your head too fast, too slow. There's a little bit of hello world stuff and a little bit of more advanced stuff. I think when we, all right, switch over to. When we first got started building iPhone applications, it obviously took a lot longer for Craig to do this, and he definitely spent the first 2 weeks hitting his head against the wall, and it certainly gets easier. A couple notes on Interface Builder. Definitely take a look at the HIG. The HIG helps you understand Apple's principles and philosophy on designing user interfaces and how that's done. It's a very interesting read for both technical and non-technical people to understand the philosophy behind how Apple is designing and building and thinking about the interfaces for their applications. And I made a nice bit.ly called bit.ly read the HIG. The default controls that you see Craig dragging onto the screen typically look bad. They're not styled. This is similar to the web. You can get default buttons and fonts from the web, and they're typically not styled. And what you're seeing is the default, and you can absolutely go in there and override that look and feel, override the controls, give it bitmaps, give it textures, make it really look like a more visually interesting applications. The Interface Builder tool produces files called XIDs or nibs. Again, it depends on if you're building Mac apps or iPhone applications. These are XML files, so you can absolutely look at them, you can check them into your source code and see what's going on there, but you should think about them logically as binary files. If you try to merge them, if you have two people messing with a nib at the same time, it'll absolutely get you in trouble, because every time you boot up Xcode and open up Interface Builder, it parses everything in that nib and then reassigns it IDs. You can get into kind of a messy situation, so definitely think about those nibs and XIDs as binary files. When you're importing graphics into your application, most iPhone applications use PNGs. This is for performance reasons. When you're importing graphics, definitely remember to use Retina assets as well. So if you're familiar, Retina phones have at2x graphics, and there's a file format. If you include an at2x file, then that at2x file will be loaded on Retina phones, and non-Retina devices like older generation iPhones or the iPad mini, which is not Retina, will get those non-Retina assets as well. Remember, anything you do in Interface Builder, you can also do in code. And so creating views, creating outlets, creating objects, all that stuff can be done in code as well. Craig walked through coding, walked through Xcode. A couple notes on Xcode. Arc and no Arc. Arc is the new technology, as Craig explained. It allows you to do automatic reference counting. That's what ARC stands for. And it really simplifies your usage of memory and how things are allocated and deallocated. Keep in mind how that actually works, because there's still a number of libraries and tools out there that are non-ARC, so it's fairly typical for seasoned iPhone developers currently to be using libraries, some that are non-ARC and some that are more newer libraries that are ARC, so just understand the differences of when you're managing memory or not. Universal and non-universal, again, if you're building an iPhone application, you can build an iPhone application. If you're building an iPad application, you can build an iPad application. Universal is just a conglomeration of both. You get to use a lot of the same logic on both, but you'll get different XIB files to manage the user interface, different graphics and things like that when launching up and that such. We're going to skip over the basics of debugging. That's a much deeper topic. When you're doing core data, so core data is a technology that Apple uses to be the database manager of your application. So the example that you saw, Craig, was grabbing data from a PHP script, putting in an array, and then populating everything in memory to that table view. If the amount of data was too large, you would then want to store that somewhere on the phone and be able to access it as needed. So if, let's say, that array was every single city in the United States, you may not want to call that API every single time. You may want to put that somewhere on disk. And core data is a database that iPhone uses, and you can certainly use that as an access method for accessing your data. If you're new to iPhone development, Stanford has a set of great iOS classes that take you through every single step of Xcode and iOS development and so forth, step by step, as you build a Hello World calculator applications. It's a great resource, and it's absolutely free. Objective-C syntax, I'll just say, if you want to get into Objective-C, you'll have to learn to like brackets. Leave it there. When you are building an application, you obviously want to test it as well and make sure it's running properly. Different platforms have slightly different test tools. Small plug for my company, we built a tool called AppLaid, which allows application distribution and testing. There's a number of other competitive products as well, including TestFlight and HockeyKit, which are the more popular tools. These allow you to take your application, once you've compiled it, upload it to a web service, and allow end users to be able to download it onto their personal devices. Provisioning is, I'll summarize, provisioning is a pain in the ass. Provisioning is the process that Apple uses to make sure that when you're testing an application, you're not distributing it to every single person on the planet and sidestepping the App Store. And so Apple uses provisioning to make sure that you're only distributing your test application to a limited number of test devices, which means you have to get the UDID from that person who you're testing on, upload it into your profile, download it into your app, and compile them together. And so some of these testing tools will help you with that process. If you are building an enterprise application, is anyone building enterprise mobile apps or considering it? A couple folks. If you are doing an enterprise application, you can apply for an enterprise provisioning profile, which basically allows you to sidestep all of that UDID provisioning nonsense. And it basically, you're agreeing with Apple that you're only going to distribute that application to the people within your enterprise, and you're not using that provisioning process to sidestep the App Store and distribute your apps outside of that. All these tools that I mentioned provide crash reporting. Providing crash reporting is an important tool to make sure that your application is getting better and better. When these applications happen in the wild or are released in the wild, you want to know when things are going right and when things are going wrong. So it's fairly typical to include a crash reporting library to know when something is crashing so that you can fix it. And lastly, when you're doing mobile applications, There are libraries to do analytics, very similar to what people do on the web. You don't write your own Google Analytics engine typically. You use a library either from Google or from another provider. Similar in mobile applications, there's any number of analytics providers that will provide you a library that you can embed in your application to really understand who's using your application, how often are they using your application, how long are they using your application, where are they using your application, so that you can improve that application. I'm not going to say application. So the potential rewards for building a great app are pretty big. Top applications in the paid category can get over 20,000 downloads a day in top paid. If you are a top free application, you can get over 200,000 in a single day. And that's an absolutely huge acquisition of users. And so it's a lot of fun when you have an app in the top of the App Store. We've done that a couple times. The secret to getting your app up there is that building the app is really half of the battle. The other half is everything else. And so there's a lot necessary to have a successful application. It comes down to both building a great app and then marketing that app. The marketing and the release cycles of mobile applications are a little bit different than web applications. When you build a web application, you put it out there, there's the initial launch, the first time you release it, but then every single time after that, Amazon isn't sending out press releases every single time they release an update to Amazon.com because they do it every single day. With apps, you really get an ability to message your customer base of this is a new release and this is what is interesting. 3 core mobile marketing tips. Apps in the App Store, and this is true of Google as well, they have momentum. And so when your application is getting downloaded more, it will get ranked higher in the App Store, which will lead to more downloads, which will lead to higher ranking, and so on and so forth. If you can keep that momentum going, then your app will get higher in the rankings, it'll be better for you. So it's actually better to have some marketing and some spread of your message across a number of days, so that way you can keep that momentum going, as opposed to blasting it all on one day and then having it fall off on day 2. Your icons and your screenshot for your application are probably some of the most important things, design elements for your application. Those are really the only 2 things that people often see of your application when they search for it in the App Store, and even more so now because of the way that the updated App Store has been designed. Third, and this is probably the most important, don't suck. Don't build a bad application. This may be simple, but there's so many apps out there that people just ignore the bad ones. And so if you're going to do it, please do it right. A couple tips for suckage minimization. Think about things that can be exclusive, things that are original, things that are first, things that you can include in your application that others haven't. Try to be best at something. It's better to be best at something than to be mediocre at a lot of things. See if you can be only at something. And so think about how your application, if you're building something, is going to fit into the overall ecosystem. I said this earlier as well. If you have an existing web application, if that's kind of where you're starting, and you're like, I'm going to bring it over into mobile, and there's something really great that can happen on mobile that can't happen on the PHP website, think about what is that great thing that can happen in mobile, and don't try to replicate every single nuance and feature that you've done in your web-based app. Really focus on what's going to make the mobile experience unique and great and interesting to customers of that. So they should be symbiotic. The mobile experience should augment the web experience, and the web experience should augment the mobile experience. I often launch before I launch, and so this is really building up momentum and energy for that application launch. So things like emails, newsletters, telling potential customers, teaser videos, things like that. When you're launching, you're really releasing that energy that you built up. So press, newsletters, advertising, Twitter, Facebook, making sure that the people who were pre-launched to, the people who were interested in your application, can really get that message over the couple days, so you're getting that momentum that I talked about earlier. So if things go well, watch your ranking, read your reviews. The App Store provides a unique opportunity for application developers to read feedback from end customers. You don't always see this from web-based applications. So you can listen to that feedback, read it, figure out what's going on, figure out what problems end users are having, read those crash reports, make sure you're addressing those issues so the quality of your application gets better. Obviously, use that success to take you further. If things don't go well, definitely look out for it. There are lots of red flags and gotchas with application development. for mobile, from simple things like your application wasn't approved because Apple hates you, to bugs in your application that you could fix, bad reviews because you did something wrong, bad timing of your launch. Make sure that you've planned out your mobile strategy such that it's not launch and hope for the best, that you have some time and capacity to actually improve and curate your application, just like you would a web application. You don't typically launch a web app and say, okay, I'm done, I'm never doing anything again. It's typically an evolutionary thing. So fix it, launch again, fixing it right, and getting it right takes practice. Closing up here, you can't have a great app without a great backend APIs, and we've seen this over and over again. The types of applications that our company has built, and we've built a lot of them, more and more are relying on backends and interactions with backends. It's not just a mobile application sitting on its own. Some of the very first apps that we did were just calculators and simple tools that would act on their own, and more, every single app that we're building has a web-based API, it ties into web services, it's taking photos and sending them to a web service, it's requesting things back, it's really meshing those two things together. And so the fact that you guys are PHP developers or web developers thinking about mobile, we're actually doing the same thing at our firm. So all of our native developers are starting to think about web, and we're starting to do more CMS work and trying to think how can these two things tie together. So I really believe great APIs have to have a great backend. I'm going to skip over mobile web. I'm guessing you guys know more about mobile web than I do. A lot of the stuff that I talked about in terms of design ties in. The user experience of mobile web is obviously a little different, and there's certain things that don't work as well, but even getting a base experience is important. For me, mobile web is about ubiquity, and native application is about experience. So if you want ubiquity, you need every single person with a phone to have access to a certain piece of data. Mobile web is a great solution to that. If you want to really go for, I want the best experience for my customers, we tend to advocate for native.